Good evening, boys and girls. Today we are going to read a very old tale, one that's been retold many, many times, and that is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It's kind of a spooky one. On the eastern bank of the lazy Tappan Zee River, nestled between two mountain peaks, rests the small valley of Sleepy Hollow, which abounds with strange and wonderful happenings. Most remarkable of these is the legend of the ghost who haunts this region. The ghost is said to wear a long woolen cap, like a trooper from the Revolutionary War. Each night, he leaves his churchyard grave and hurries to the site of a long-forgotten battle. Riding his huge horse, the ghost is a body in frantic search of his head. Lost in a raging battle, he is known as the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. We're talking about setting this week. This illustration gives you the when and probably somewhat of the setting. Into the sleepy little community came a new schoolmaster, Ichabod Crane. Appropriately named, he was tall and thin with long skinny arms and legs. With one leg tucked under his body, he could have easily been mistaken for a crane. Ichabod made little money for his services, so local parents took turns letting the schoolmaster live with them. To earn extra money, he gave singing lessons to young ladies of the community. He often had dinner with these pupils and their families. After dessert, he and women gathered around the fireplace to exchange marvelous and frightening ghost tales. In particular, they told tales of the Headless Horseman. The excitement of the stories, however, turned into terrifying memories due to Ichabod's walk home. Ichabod trembled in the dark shadows and unrecognizable shapes. He would freeze, listening for galloping hoofs. Then, realizing it was only the wind in the trees and not the Headless Horseman, he would then continue on his way. Ichabod had a secret wish. He longed to live in one of the valley's huge farmhouses, and he hoped to marry into a family who owned one. One of Sleepy Hollow's wealthy farmers had a daughter who was not yet married, and Ichabod gave her singing lessons. Ichabod was determined to make this student, Katrina von Tassel, his wife. Unfortunately for Ichabod, Katrina already had a suitor. He was tall with a huge chest and muscular arms. His name was Brom Van Brunt, but because of his great strength, his friends called him Brom Bones. Everybody loved Brom, and he loved practical jokes and pranks. When the local folks awoke at midnight and heard horses galloping past their farmhouses, they smiled at the whooping and hollering and exclaimed, "There goes Brom Bones and his gang." A silent feud arose between Brom and the schoolmaster as they competed to win Katrina's hand. Ichabod tried to impress Katrina with his intellect and singing, while Brom tried to embarrass Ichabod. One sunny autumn day, a messenger arrived at the schoolhouse and invited Ichabod to a party that evening at the Van Tassel farmhouse. Ichabod dismissed school early and ran all the way home. He shaved, washed, combed his hair, and put on his only suit and had a wool hat, making certain he looked his very best. Then he borrowed a horse and saddles from his host. Ichabod mounted old Gunpowder, and he gave him a kick and took off to the Van Tassel farm. Shortly after Ichabod's arrival, Brom Bones rode up in front of the farmhouse and dismounted his horse Daredevil. The fiddler soon started the music, and Ichabod, believing himself to be a wonderful dancer, led Katrina to the dance floor. He boomed and bounced, he bobbed, he twitched and turned and twirled. Meanwhile, watching the dancers, Brom Bones glared with jealousy. When the dance ended, Ichabod joined a group of people on the porch who were telling tales of the Headless Horseman. Someone said that the nightly search for his head, the ghost tied up his horse. Someone said that in the nightly search for his head, the ghost tied up his horse among the graves in the local churchyard. The church stood on a small hill, where a nearby stream trickled over the road. Across the stream lay a wooden plank bridge, shaded by thick overhanging branches. Local folks agreed that this bridge was where the Headless Horseman was most often met. Brom Bones joined the group and claimed that one evening he was overtaken by the horseman himself, whom he challenged to a race. Brom and the daredevil were winning until the horseman reached the wooden plank bridge, and the headless ghost vanished in a pillar of fire. Ichabod listened intently to the stories until the party broke up. As the guests began to leave, the schoolmaster lingered behind. Tonight he intended to ask for Katrina's hand. Ichabod crept up to Katrina's side and whispered something to her ear. Startled, she squealed and quickly drew away from Ichabod. Poor, embarrassed Ichabod turned red, scowled, and stomped out of the house. He quickly mounted Gunpowder, gave him a kick, and spurred the horse into action. It was past midnight as Ichabod traveled towards his temporary home. As he thought of the evening's events and all the scary stories and ghostly tales began to return, he stopped thinking he heard a whistle, but it was only the wind rustling through the trees. He heard a groan, but it was only two branches rubbing against each other. And then, out of the shadows, there rose a huge, dark figure, and it did not move. Who are you? Ichabod stammered. Instead of answering, the shadow figure slowly moved to the middle of the road. Ichabod could just make out the form of a large horse upon which towered a huge man covered with a dark, flowing cloak. Ichabod kicked Gunpowder and dashed forward, but the stranger stayed right behind him. Ichabod slowed his horse to a walk, and the rider slowed also. As the pair topped a hill, the silhouette of Ichabod's companion appeared clearly against the sky. Ichabod's eyes flew open in horror. His companion had no head, and the head which should have rested on the horseman's shoulder instead rested on his saddle. Ichabod kicked and whipped and yelled at Gunpowder. Away they dashed, and the ghost matching stride for stride. Stones flew, sparks flashed. The riders now approached the road to Sleepy Hollow, but Gunpowder bolted toward the opposite road. This road led across the wood plank bridge and up the hill to the church with its graveyard. Can you see them? Quite the illustration. Filled with panic, Ichabod suddenly felt his saddle slipping off. He grabbed Gunpowder around the neck as the saddle slipped to the ground and the ghostly horse trampled it. Ahead through the trees, Ichabod could see the church. Gunpowder pounded over the bridge. Ichabod turned around expecting the ghost to disappear. Instead, the ghost stood up in his stirrups and hurled his head at Ichabod. The schoolmaster tried to dodge the missile, but was hit and fell to the ground. Then the ghostly rider and horses thundered past like a whirlwind. Sunrise found Gunpowder without a saddle or a bridle outside his master's gate. Ichabod could not be found. After searching the area, local folks found the trampled saddle on the road leading to the church. Beyond the bridge, they found Ichabod's hat, and close by, they found a shattered pumpkin. Gasper said the schoolmaster had left Sleepy Hollow because he was terrified of the ghost and he was embarrassed about losing his sweetheart. Katrina married Brom Bones, who always burst into laughter at the mention of the pumpkin, and some people believed he knew more than he was telling. But the old country wives believe the schoolmaster was spirited away by supernatural means, and those who pass the bridge on a warm summer evening often fancy they hear the voice of the schoolmaster singing a melancholy tune amid the quiet breezes of Sleepy Hollow. Now, at the back of this book, there is a little paragraph or a couple paragraphs about the original author, Washington Irving. He was born in 1783 and died in 1859. Born in New York City, Washington Irving was the youngest of 11 children. As a boy, he explored much of the New York countryside, which later served as a backdrop for his folk tales. By the time Irving was 26, he was a well-established writer in both the States and in Europe, but he did not use his own name on his work until he was in his 50s. His many pseudonyms were Jonathan Oldstyle, Lancelot Wagstaff, and Friar Antonio Agapita. The legend of Sleepy Hollows first appeared in his collection of stories entitled The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon. Now, pseudonyms are writers will often write underneath someone else's name to disguise themselves. Dr. Seuss had many pseudonyms that he used as he wrote. Irving was the first American author to receive widespread critical acclaim abroad as well as at home, fulfilling his lifelong dream of creating American folklore. The sale of his popular stories brought him a handsome fortune. He died in Tarrytown, New York, and was elected to the American Hall of Fame in 1900. So that's a little backstory. So is this a true story? No, it is a folk tale, and it's a tale that's been told for many, many years. I hope you enjoyed this spooky one tonight.